The 1990s concluded with Nintendo feeling triumph and defeat. Its N64 console easily trounced the Sega Saturn system in sales and popularity. But both systems had their clocks cleaned by the 100 million selling Sony PlayStation, a system that owed its existence to Nintendo having commissioned its creation, and Sony's thirst for revenge after Nintendo's backhanded business dealings. And while Nintendo's Super Mario 64 was hailed as nothing short of revolutionary, third-party developers had left for Sony's greener pastures, leaving the N64 with mostly first-party hits. As the new millennium approached, Nintendo would struggle to reclaim its status at the top of the industry, an industry that was getting pretty crowded. Soon, a fourth participant in the console war would enter the fray, leaving Nintendo feeling While the N64 wasn't a runaway hit, Nintendo maintained a firm grip on the handheld market with the 8-bit Game Boy, thanks in large part to another trademark first-party franchise. But it wasn't Mario, Zelda, or even Donkey Kong. It was Pokémon. And it was a worldwide phenomenon. Pokémon was the brainchild of Satoshi Tajiri, who had learned the ways of simple yet addictive game design from Nintendo's resident expert, Shigeru Miyamoto. Released in 1995 in Japan, Pokémon's premise was summed up in its catchphrase, "Gotta catch 'em all." Players roamed the land searching for every single type of over 100 different Pokémon, battling rival trainers or collectors along the way. The kids of Japan took the slogan to heart, and within 2 years, Pokémon sold 10.4 million copies. It spawned an anime series as well, which made global headlines in 1997 when over 600 Japanese kids were admitted to hospitals after suffering seizures, apparently induced by a Pokémon episode's flashing colors. The bizarre incident wasn't enough to keep Pokémon from reaching America in 1998. Just as they had dominated in Japan, the game and show found near instantaneous success in the United States and managed to sell almost 10 million copies. Even though Game Boy had been around for nearly a decade, the console flourished with a whole new generation of kids. In 1998, Nintendo finally released the Game Boy Color. 2 years later, Pokémon sequels transfixed kids again. But by 2001, the Game Boy had begun to show its age. Nintendo took the next step, releasing a 16-bit upgrade, the Game Boy Advance. The first version of the console had survived for 12 years before it was replaced, and even hung around for another 2 years before finally racking up almost 120 million units sold. In the meantime, competitors had come and gone. The Game Gear, Lynx, TurboGrafx Express, Neo Geo Pocket Color, and the Wonder Swan, a Bandai-made system that owed its creation to Game Boy's own inventor, the late Gunpei Yokoi. All fell before the Game Boy's might. If only Nintendo's other video game ventures were so mighty. Meanwhile, Sega's newest console, the Dreamcast, was released in November 1998 to a tepid response in Japan. Its American launch in September of the following year, on the other hand, was a smash, selling over 500,000 consoles in just 2 weeks. Sega finally had another hit on its hands. Until, of course, Sony released its own next-gen console, the PlayStation 2, in 2000. Just as the first PlayStation wiped the floor with its competition, Sony's PS2 erupted onto the scene, moving nearly 1 million units in Japan in 1 day. The Dreamcast's 1-year head start didn't matter. Third parties pulled Dreamcast support, flocking to the PS2. But by March 2001, Sega threw in the towel, announcing their exit from the console business to focus exclusively on software. In fact, later that year, 2 Sega games would be launch titles for Nintendo's newest console. But if consumers mourned the loss of Sega in 2001, they didn't grieve long. Nintendo's newest system, the GameCube, would launch on November 18th. And if that weren't enough, another tech giant was barging into the video game market to take Sega's place. Microsoft's Xbox was scheduled to launch a mere 3 days before the GameCube. The latest console war had begun. Sony's PlayStation 2 was the clear frontrunner, considering its growing catalog of hit games after a year on the market, a built-in DVD player, and its backwards compatibility with the original PlayStation's game library. The new challenger, Microsoft's Xbox, had plenty to offer as well, like its own DVD player, an internal hard drive, and an integrated Ethernet adapter for high-speed online gaming. The GameCube came in purple or black and had a little handle so you could carry it. In many ways, this was an unfair fight. Microsoft had the capital to brute force its way into the console market, a move Sony used a generation before with the PlayStation. Sony and Microsoft both had enough money pouring in through their other divisions to offset the costs of entering the video game market cold. Even selling feature-packed consoles at a loss was manageable for Nintendo's competitors. Nintendo, by contrast, made only games. How could it hope to compete against two big-spending tech giants with virtually unlimited wallets? The GameCube's North American launch still managed to impress, however. Priced $100 lower than the competition, the GameCube moved over 500,000 units in its first week on shelves. But Microsoft kept pace with Nintendo. The Xbox sold out of its supply of 300,000 units after its first week. When it came to playing actual games, not DVDs, the GameCube was on a pretty level playing field with the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. And having learned how toxic cartridges had become to developers, Nintendo made the switch to discs. While the Xbox and PS2 ran on full-size 12cm CDs and DVDs, with capacity upwards of 8.5 gigabytes of data, Nintendo commissioned Panasonic to create special proprietary mini DVD discs. Like the N64 cartridges, the mini DVD format was company president Hiroshi Yamauchi's solution for foiling would-be game pirates. The discs measured at 8 centimeters, but only offered 1.5 gigabytes of data capacity. For many game makers, this was plenty of space. But for developers pushing the generation's technical limits, the mini DVD presented problems. Bigger games required more than one disc to play, and some cross-platform titles required video and audio to be more compressed, or for some features to be omitted from the GameCube ports entirely. While these technical limitations may not have been enough to doom the console, the actual system's physical design seemed a clear signal to gamers. The purple cube, the lunchbox handle, the bizarre controller with bean-shaped buttons, and the baby-sized game disc signified that Nintendo wasn't making real games for real gamers. Nintendo had reinforced its reputation as safe, kid-friendly, and extremely uncool. Of course, the GameCube still boasted some amazing titles that couldn't be found anywhere else. At launch, LucasArts and Factor 5 offered up Star Wars Rogue Leader, a space combat game set around the classic Star Wars trilogy that blew gamers away with fantastic visuals and top-notch action. A few weeks after GameCube's launch, Nintendo released its latest Shigeru Miyamoto title, a new real-time strategy franchise called Pikmin. It quickly established itself as a Nintendo staple, selling over 1 million copies. A month after the console's launch, Nintendo released Super Smash Bros. Melee, the sequel to its homegrown fighter that pitted its trademark characters in four-way combat. Melee became the GameCube's best-selling title with over 7 million copies. And in 2002, Nintendo ported a late-cycle Japanese N64 game, Animal Crossing, to the GameCube, a decision that won tons of critical praise and establishing yet another lucrative franchise for the company's family of consoles. And in 2002, Nintendo released Metroid Prime, a radical reworking of Gunpei Yokoi's side-scrolling franchise. Created by Retro Studios, a second-party developer in Austin, Texas, Metroid Prime helped combat Nintendo's kids-only vibe by reinventing the series as a thrilling first-person shooter. The new direction was a critical hit, feeling at once familiar and utterly brand new. Prime is remembered as one of the best, most highly praised games of the generation. But there were glaring omissions from the GameCube's lineup. For one, where was Mario? For the first time ever, Nintendo's home console didn't have a game featuring Mario at launch. What consumers got instead was Luigi's Mansion, which ditched the running, jumping, and stomping. In their place was a vacuum cleaner that sucked ghosts. But despite praise from critics, longtime Nintendo fans thought that the vacuum wasn't all that sucked about Luigi's Mansion. Mario did finally get his own game about a half a year later. Super Mario Sunshine was released in summer 2002, and, like Luigi's Mansion, gave Mario a contraption that augmented the familiar mechanics fans had grown to love. Instead of a ghost-sucking vacuum, Mario had a water-spraying hose, with which he cleaned up graffiti on a tropical island. Once again, critics praised Super Mario Sunshine, but some wondered why Nintendo was gussying up their mascots with all the gimmicky gadgets. Other longtime Nintendo franchises got similarly reworked, pushing hardcore gamers away in droves. Star Fox Adventures in 2002 was a third-person action game, bringing Fox McCloud out of the stars and onto the ground. Though developed by Nintendo's hitmaker Rare, Star Fox Adventures didn't have nearly the impact of Donkey Kong Country and GoldenEye 007. Even worse, Microsoft shelled out a cool $375 million to purchase Rare outright, a mere one day after Star Fox Adventure's North American release. That wasn't all though. When the new installment of Miyamoto's other long-running franchise was unveiled, many fans considered it the final nail in the coffin. In 2003, Nintendo released The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. It was as good a Zelda game as any, if not the best one yet. But visually, Wind Waker once again reinforced claims that the GameCube was merely a toy. Link and the Kingdom of Hyrule were rendered in cel-shaded style, a visual effect that made games look like interactive cartoons. The revelation was made worse by the fact that in 2000, Nintendo showed off a demo reel featuring a dark and gritty version of Zelda. Wind Waker was a hit among critics and fans who remained loyal to Nintendo, selling 4.6 million copies. But if the company was trying to fight its family's first image, this didn't help. In the end, the GameCube wasn't a failure for Nintendo, but it was the closest the company had come to defeat since entering the video game market 2 decades earlier. The PlayStation 2 was the unquestionable king of the hill, having sold 141 million units worldwide, though the final tally for the Xbox and the GameCube revealed that they finished neck and neck. The Xbox still beat out the industry veteran, selling 24 million to Nintendo's 22 million. Nintendo had slipped from its second-place status to a dismal third. Some believed this was the end of Nintendo's console-making days. Why not leave consoles to the big boys? Why not just make great games for other systems, like Sega was doing? The argument made a certain sense. But on the other hand, Nintendo's successes came by following its own path. No, the secret to reclaiming success wasn't as elusive as it seemed. For its next console, Nintendo would take its cues from the consumers it sought to reclaim. If you don't like what you're playing, there's one simple solution: change the game. Tune in next time for Nintendo's Revolution.
It's that time of year again. Join us for the 2012's Inside Gaming Awards on December 8th. It all goes down at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on MachinimaLive.com. And don't forget to cast your vote for this year's Gamer's Choice Award.